In this video, we're going to talk about a topic that's important regardless of your score goals, and that topic is pacing, or how to manage your time. One of the biggest difference between the SAT and any other test you might take in high school, and pretty much any test you'll take in the future with some exceptions, is the issue of time. Most students have no problems in school with time on their tests. You're given enough time. It's not a test of how you can perform under time in those situations. It's a test of how well you know the content. And of course the SAT is, a test of how well you know particular kinds of content, how well you can think in particular ways, as I've talked about in other videos. But it's also a test of how you can do that under time. Because frankly, if they gave you unlimited time or even more time to do these sections, most people would do a lot better, and I think it would be harder for them to get the results they want. So being under time pressure is an important aspect of the SAT, and one we need to manage if we're going to maximize our scores. So the first thing to discuss is that there's kind of a very weird, contradictory aspect to the SAT that I've kind of been thinking about recently, and I think it'll hit home for you when I describe it. And that's the fact that you have both too much time and too little time. Now, how does that make sense? Well, first off, you have too much time due to the fact that this test is 3 hours and 45 minutes long. I mean, that's not even counting the breaks. So that means you're sitting in the chair for this long and you're working for that amount of time. So most of us don't do tests that long that we're working that amount of time. So fatigue can be a factor for some students, especially when you get into the second or the third reading section. By then you're just so tired or annoyed with what you're doing that a lot of times you just want to give up. And so on the one hand, we have to deal with the fact that there's too much time. There's almost like we wanted the test to be shorter. On the other hand, we have too little time, and that's because this 3 hours and 45 minutes is divided into 10 separate sections of anywhere from 10 from the shortest to 25 minutes apiece. And in that apportioned time, so if you're given 25 minutes, say, for Section 2, you've got to finish Section 2 in that 25 minutes, and in theory you can't go back to Section 2 or move ahead to another section. You can't use your time like that because that's cheating. You got to use your time given to you for each section, and that time only. You can't go over or under. You can go under. You can finish early, but you can't go over. So there's a weird thing here where you've got almost too much time for the entire test. It's just way too much to do. And then on the other hand, you have too little time because Section 2 is 25 minutes, and when you're done with that, you got to move on. Section 3 is 25. When you're done with that, you got to move on. So you're kind of feeling rushed. So it's a weird thing where you're feeling rushed on the one hand, and yet you're getting tired on the other. And that combination of being rushed and getting tired is what's so challenging about the time aspect of the SAT. So in terms of pacing, and pacing is just an easy way of saying how we, in what order we do questions, how we approach sections, and how many questions we do when we do a section. There are two main pacing factors that will affect how you approach each one of the sections. The first, of course, is the section that you're working on. So if it's a math, a reading, or a writing, you're going to approach those sections in different ways because, frankly, they're different, and there's different aspects to those sections that we need to be aware of in order to maximize our time. And the second pacing factor is the score goal, your score goal, so what you want to get. If you want to get a 500 in math, that means something very different than if you want to get an 800. That's going to imply certain pacing steps that we're going to have to take for each one of those. In short, if you want to get 800, you got to do all the questions. If you want to get a 500, you don't have to do all the questions. And in fact, trying to do all the questions if you want to get a 500 can actually hurt you. So these are the two pacing factors. And now what we're going to do is, as you can tell, we're going to talk about each section and discuss how we approach each section and why each section is different, and how we can pace ourselves appropriately. So the first one we'll discuss is math, and I discuss this one first because it's the most clear-cut of the two sections, and that's because the math curve is relatively generous. I mean, all the curves are pretty generous, but the math is in particular. So the first thing that is important here, and I mentioned this in other videos before, is how many questions you do per section. So how many should I omit is a question I got. So how many should I omit? And this is a question we're going to ask for the three sections. But in this section, it's pretty clear, and it depends on your score goals. So let's say, for instance, you want to get a 500, like I mentioned before. That means, according to this guideline, you can omit 8 per section. And as long as you get the vast majority, as long as you get most of the questions you do right, you're going to hit your 500 or maybe even higher. If you want to get a 600, then you can omit 4 per section. So what does this mean? Well, there's a 20 question, an 18 question, and a 16 question section. So if you want to get a 500, that means you got to do 12 in this one, 10 in this one, and 8 in this one. Of course, if you do, 14 here, then you've got room to omit more in the later sections, but we won't get more complicated than this. Now notice, if you want to get a 650 plus, you really can omit only one or two, and frankly it's pretty close to zero there anyway. Of course, if you want to get a 700, you can't omit any, because you really have no room for error. And when you're talking about a 700, you're talking about 5 or 6 questions between a 700 and an 800, so there really is no room for omitting there. So this is the general guideline to follow if you want to get a certain score in math. And why do we do this? Well, this comes down to the fact that there's an order of difficulty in the section. So if we look at the 20 question section, we can break that down into 3/3. So question 1 to 7 are considered to be easy, 8 to 14 or so are medium, and 15 to 20 are hard. And now these breakdowns are rough. Now I don't want to say that 1 to 7 are always easy, 8 to 14 are always medium, but this is just a rough breakdown. And again, by easy, medium, and difficult or hard, I don't mean that it's easy, so you should be able to do it. If you can't do it, you're dumb. What I simply mean by easy is that when these questions are used as experimental questions, when they're using them in the experimental section in previous administrations of the test, the SAT figures out, okay, this number of students got these questions right, so that means that these are considered easy. These are considered medium, these are considered hard. They want to give the full range of difficulty on the test. Okay, so why do we do pacing? Well, if we look at this 20 question section, for instance, and we break it down like this, if you want to get, say, a 550, venturing your way into the hards is really unnecessary, because you can get your 550 by just getting the majority of these right. In fact, you can get a 600 plus by getting just the easies and mediums right. So what does that mean? It means if you're, say, trying to get a 550 or struggling in the 500s, and you're doing every single question, or at least attempting every single question, you're actually hurting your score. Think about it. The reason you're hurting your score is you're rushing through the easies because they're easy, maybe making some really dumb mistakes. Getting easies wrong where you just made mistakes are just so deadly. You got to avoid that, because those are points you need. Rushing through the mediums, or at least spending a little bit more time on the mediums, but still not devoting a lot of time to them, and either making dumb mistakes here or missing questions that you could do if you just slowed down and spent some time on. And then going ahead and moving on to the hards, where they're just spending way too much time on hard questions that, the point is this: why would you spend a ton of time on these hard questions if you're missing questions behind, right? Why would you dump a bunch of time into this if you're making dumb mistakes here, or if you're just not spending enough time here and getting the maximum number of points here that you can get? So that's why when you omit your 8 per section, let's say you're getting a 500 8 per section, omit the 8s, of course, from the hards. You don't have to, but target omitting from the hards and try to get this first 2/3 first. If you're generally struggling with the math section, make sure you're getting these first. I mean, the hards are irrelevant. If you're not getting the easies and mediums almost 100% correct, worrying about the hards to any significant degree is not really a great use of your time. Once you go ahead and get the majority of these done in a good amount of time, and you get them right, then you can go and start worrying about how to approach the hards. But for now, if you're going into the 500s, 550s, you got to worry about the easy mediums. Now, again, if you're 600 or 650 plus, this doesn't apply to you. You pretty much have to do all the questions. In that case, what I'll say, and this actually applies to anyone who is doing any kind of SAT stuff, if you're having issues with timing, then you have to be afraid, or you can't be afraid to skip questions and go back to them. Because what you don't want is you don't want to dump a bunch of time into a question, say number 12, spend 5 minutes working on it when you've got 8 questions ahead. So what you got to get comfortable doing is skipping that question, doing the ones later, and then coming back to it. What I do when I do this is I'll circle the number of the question in the test booklet so that I know when I've done the questions to go back and look for circles. And in fact, I use circles for any question that I might want to look at again and give a second look to. So don't be afraid to skip and come back, and in general, don't be afraid to go out of order and be more predatory. Don't try to do the test from 1 to 20 like you would at a high school test. You don't have to complete it in that order. You can skip questions, you can move around, be flexible, be dynamic. Okay, one more thing about the maths, and that is about the grid-ins. So this 18 question section is a grid-in section. You've got 8 multiple choice and 10 grid-ins. Just remember that the difficulty level resets from the 8 multiple choice to the grid-ins. So that means 1 to 2 are easy, or 1 to 3 are easy, 4 to 6 are medium, 7 to 8 are hard, and there are your multiple choices, and then it resets. So 10 to 12 your grid-ins are easy, 13 to 15 are your medium grid-ins, and 16 to 18 are your hards. So just remember that when you're doing your skipping. One other thing about skipping, this applies in general, just be very careful when you're bubbling in your grid-ins. Let's say you're doing number 1 you get A, number 2 you get B, and then 3 you skip. Be careful you don't bubble in the answer to number 4 for 3. like that, right? Because that will just screw up everything later. So just be careful when you're skipping, that you don't miss bubble anything. So that's pretty much it for the breakdown for the math. This is the most straightforward section in terms of how many to omit, as you're going to see. So now the critical reading. As you can see, I don't have a chart equivalent to the math chart here. I have just a blank page here. And that's because regardless of your score goals, you want to omit as few as possible when it comes to the reading questions. Now the sentence completions we're going to talk about in a second, but the reading questions you want to omit as few as possible. And frankly, this might even be true of the sentence completions, because you're always able, in general, to eliminate at least 2 answers for each question. Just because those 2 answers are generally going to be pretty stupid. And if you can eliminate 2, you got to take a guess in that situation. So you really should only omit in the critical reading when either if it's a sentence completion and you just have no idea about the vocab, no idea about the sentence, or if it's a reading question where you just don't even understand the question. Or you just don't understand that part of the passage or something, where you can't even eliminate anything. So that's in terms of how many should I omit. The answer is as few as possible, because you can eliminate so often. With the math, on some questions it's just not possible. You can't even begin to eliminate. That's why you should omit. On the critical reading, because you can eliminate so often, there's really no reason to omit a lot, even if you're going for a 500 or 600. You still want to try to do as many as you can. Now that doesn't mean you try every question. There's going to be a breakdown here in terms of how we approach the questions, and this is what that is. So the sentence completions, you've got 19 of these on the test. I think it's 19, 8 plus 6, yeah. 19 of these on the test. Now, these have an order of difficulties, just like the math, so there's easy, mediums, and hards. And what I suggest, if you're having issues pacing yourself in the reading section, first look at how much time you're spending on these sentence completions, especially if you're not getting a lot of them right. This is what I mean. So let's take a look at, say, a reading section that has 8 sentence completions. The first 3 or so will be easy. The next, maybe 2 will be medium-ish, and maybe the last 3 will be hard. What you don't want to do when you're doing this section, if you're having trouble pacing and you're not getting all the sentence completions right, is you don't want to do these sentence completions and then get bogged down in these hards. Because you have in this section you're going to have 16 reading questions to follow. I think it's 16. 21, yeah. You're going to have 16 reading questions to follow, and if you're getting bogged down in these hard sentence completions, you're losing time on this. So what I suggest first, if you're having issues pacing yourself, you might want to look at the sentence completion section. And one thing I might suggest is do the first half of the sentence completions. So do these, skip the hard ones, do the reading, and then come back. That might help you to deal with some of the pacing issues if you're getting bogged down in the sentence completions, because these sentence completions should really take you less than 5 minutes. I mean, that's probably almost even too much time. They really should go very quick. Most of your time in the reading section should be spent on the reading, as you'd expect. For actual pacing on the reading, there's no order of difficulty, and if you like more information about the reading section, I suggest checking out the many videos I've done on this, but I'm just going to give you the basic breakdown now. There's no order of difficulty, so we can't tell what's easy, medium, or difficult, which is unfortunate, because then we can't make judgments on what questions to do based off of difficulty. The best I can say is, again, just like with math, don't get bogged down. So the reading, don't get bogged down on a question. Go back, if you're reading the passage, you can't find the answer, you're just confused, just move on to the next question. You might find that doing the next question might actually help you answer the question before. Or you might find that once you've done all the rest of the questions in a section, going back to that other question actually is pretty easy, because now you kind of get the context and it's a little bit more clear. So don't get bogged down in a question, keep moving, keep at a brisk pace. And again, a lot of the pacing stuff just comes out of having good technique, and that technique I talk about in other reading videos. Don't read the passage first. Go right to the first question. Read with a question in mind. Look for the specific part of the passage that discusses that question. They're going to give you a line reference most of the time. You just don't get bogged down. Follow the technique, and you should be pretty good on time. For you, maybe there's an issue of reading speed. How do you fix that? Well, I'm just going to say practice a lot. Do all 10 practice tests according to the technique. In the official College Board study guide, according to my technique, that should improve your reading speed. So yeah, don't get bogged down. Omit as few as possible in general, because you can eliminate. If you're having issues with pacing, consider skipping the first half or the second half of the sentence completions, so you have enough time to do the reading, because there are many more points available in the reading than there are in the sentence completions. Alright, now the last section in the writing. I'm going to briefly touch on the essay, because the essay is not, most students don't have much of an issue with pacing in the essay, but I will say a few things about it, or one thing in particular about it, and that's about, should I plan or not? Should I plan? It's up to you. If you're getting a 12 and you don't plan, then I'm not going to tell you to change. If you're getting a 10 and you don't plan, I may not ask you to change either. But if you're getting a 6 and you don't plan, you might want to consider planning. And what do I mean by planning? I simply mean take less than 5 minutes to write out or to kind of sketch out an outline. So, your thesis, what you're going to argue. Example 1 that supports your thesis. Example 2. Just like this. This is what I mean by planning. Just so you know what you're going to write. What you don't want to do is get into the thing of, writing your introduction and then thinking as you're writing your introduction how you're going to write your body paragraphs. And then when you get to body paragraph 1, start thinking about how you're going to write body paragraph 1. And then paragraph 2, you start thinking about how you write that. You want to have a pretty good idea of what you're going to write about and how you're going to connect it back to your thesis before you should start writing. Now, you might think, oh, well, if I spend this time now, I'm not going to have a lot of time to write later. Well, that's kind of short-sighted to think that way, because if you plan this stuff ahead, you can write much more quickly and much more efficiently later, therefore saving your time writing a better essay. And in addition, another reason to plan early is you can put more structure, more fine structure into your essay. So at the end of your intro, you can reference your examples. You can build your examples into your paragraphs and then work them back and reference back your thesis in a very structured, organized way. You can have transitions that will cleanly lead you from one paragraph to another. So actually planning can help you both with time and with structure, and both of those should help you improve your writing score, your grammar score, or I should say your essay score. Moving on to the grammars. Oh, one other thing. Also have prepped examples. So there are a number of examples that can apply to pretty much any prompt that they can throw at you. So examples might be the civil rights movement. I'm just kind of throwing stuff out there. Civil War, 1984, or Hamlet. There are a lot of books and historical events and current events that can apply to so many different topics. So if you can come up with 4 to 6 pre-prepped prepped examples that you can use on later topics, that can really help streamline this process. Because if you get a really good question, you can say, oh, okay, civil rights movement, 1984, done, and then start writing. So having some examples prepped ahead of time can really help. Alright, and now what about the grammar questions? So the grammar questions. Now again, I don't give you a general guideline for omitting in terms of how many you should omit per section. The general rule is omit as few as possible, just like in the reading. Reason for this is because, again, you can pretty much always eliminate at least 2 choices, because in all the grammar questions it's going to be at least 2 choices that are just ridiculous. So if you're eliminating 2 or if you're eliminating 3, as we talked about in guessing strategy, you should be guessing. You shouldn't leave those blank. Now here's the thing. In terms of how to approach the sections, again, just like in the reading, you may not want, if you're having issues with pacing in the grammar questions, you may not want to do the questions in order from 1 to 34 or 1 to 35, right? You might want to be a little bit more strategic, and this is what I mean. So let's take a look at the 35 question grammar section. There's a 14 question section. I don't have much to say about that because, frankly, that is just all improving sentences. So you just do 1 to 14 and you just do your best in that 10 minutes. But the 35 question, 25-minute section is the main one we have to discuss. And it's broken down like this. So you have 1 to 11 are your improving sentences, and those are those long ones, with underlined sentences that you've got to fix. And they're generally long to do because you've got to read the choice, see if it works with the original sentence. If it doesn't, you read the next. They take a really long time. Then you've got from 12 to 29 are your error IDs. And these are the relatively quick ones to do, right? You've just got some kind of sentence with underlined words, and you've got to pick the word or phrase or whatever that's grammatically incorrect. And these are relatively short to do. Then you've got your improving paragraphs. And these are your combinations between, grammar, improving sentences, grammar and improving sentences, and also some critical reading, kind of a combination between those 2 skills. Now, in this section, there is an order of difficulty. So, 11 is your hardest, and 1 is your easiest. 29 is your hardest. In this section, 12 is your easiest. In this, however, you pretty much only have easy mediums. So actually, these improving paragraphs are generally pretty easy points for most people. So if you're having issues with grammar pacing, this is what I might say to you. These take a really long time, and a lot of people get bogged down in them. So what you might consider doing is do the first, 6 of these, 1 to 6, because they're the relatively easy and quick ones, and they're easy mediums. So do those first, just like in the sentence completions. Do the first half, then move on to these and do these. These are quick relatively. The error IDs, you just kind of look for the underlined word that's incorrect grammatically, and then you move on. These are quick. And of course, you focus, make sure you get the easies, mediums before you worry about those hards. Then you move on to these. These are easies, mediums. We want to get these because these are pretty much easy points. Then, if you've got time, which you hopefully should, you can go back and finish 7 to 11. Now, why does this strategy work well? I think it works well because, let's say you are running out of time. If you do it the traditional way, 1 to 35, when you run out of time, you're probably going to run out of time in this area with improving paragraphs. And that's unfortunate because these are easy mediums. We can get these. In my strategy, with the way I've shown you here, if you run out of time, you're running out of time on 7 to 11, right? And that's okay because those are the hard, really long improving sentence questions. So if we're going to run out of time anywhere, we want to run out of time at the hard, long questions. Now, you may get lucky. I mean, most people are not going to run out of time. But this is just a way to streamline your process. And again, the same rules apply. If you're getting bogged down in a question, skip it, circle it, move back to it. Go back to it later. Move on. Keep moving. Don't get bogged down because that's the way you can best use your time. Let's see. I think that's all I actually have to say about pacing. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below or send me a message. And if anything was unclear, I'll be sure to give you some clarification.